Elizabeth's and mine. No offense, but too many people chiming in just creates a lot of confusion. You can certainly chime in the chat area anytime you want. So this is Patrick Rhames. I've been to Ireland with this guy a couple of times. You all know him. He's past president of the club.
Oh, sorry, John. I went down. I hit the wrong one. Sorry, Jonathan. I was like, right.
Patrick's got a printer to die for, and if you need a print, he's the guy to see. I'm kind of jealous. I had an opportunity to go in on it with him, and I turned him down. Probably a mistake. The wonderful printer. Anyway, Patrick, you've got some things lined up for us. Everybody knows where the chat feature is now. So why don't you get started?
All right, and
okay, I will.
Just like during our meeting, if you go up to view everyone, you can say hi to everyone and make Pat's screen bigger. So I'm making you presenter, Patrick.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen, right?
Yep.
Now, it's actually showing my both screens, so I'm going to share just the one.
I only see one screen for you.
Hopefully it's the one that I'm going to pull up right now.
Yeah,
hang on.
I think so.
You should see, do you see Photoshop now?
I see your pathway.
Okay, good.
I see the approach.
That's the one.
Yes, it is in Photoshop. Okay.
I think this is the first image. It is the first image, actually. And I feel a little honored and a little intimidated at the same time. The first thing I want to confess to you is I'm by no means an expert at any of this stuff. I just play with these images long enough to get them to where I like them. This particular, let's start out with why I selected it. John and I were together at Woodlake Rodeo. This was back in probably 2018. And we were up in the stands and obviously taking shots of the rodeo action, and that's the big draw for me is the action that you can capture in these events, particularly bull riding. That seems to be usually the most exciting event. And so why do I like it? I like this one because of all of the action. This certainly tells a story in my mind. And let's kind of, when I'm shooting these kinds of events, I've got a general idea in my head what I want. As I stated, I'm looking for shots that are interesting and present a lot of interesting action, being that rodeo is all about action. And with the idea that I'll try to finish it as artistically as I can. So how do I shoot them? I do this most of the time anyway, as John and Jim will tell you. They often kid me about it, but normally when I'm photographing, I've got a large capacity card in the camera, and I've got the camera set to continuous shooting, high speed, continuous shooting, particularly if it's an event like this. Many of you probably do the same thing. Got the speed, the shutter speed way up at about probably 2,000. If I had this open in Lightroom, I could tell you, but it's usually right at 2,000. The lens is a long lens. I think this was a lens that was zoomed from 2 to 5, and probably I'm at pretty close to 5 with this. Although I'm trying to control things that are in the bottom you can't see, like there's a fence down there that I don't want in the shot. But even so, the shot's been cropped a lot. Okay, so as you can see, some bodies, if you can watch my cursor, there's some bodies up here that I cropped out because I didn't want all their faces distracting this particular frame. I didn't really finish my thought on my process in capturing these things. I have no idea when I am shooting at a high burst rate and trying to just keep the lens focused on my subject matter. I don't see this. I mean, I didn't see this in my eye and brain until I got home and started processing them and going through the many images that I capture using that process. But that's what I find advantageous about shooting at high speed, continuous shooting. That thing that's popping up over here is my Wacom tablet, so I'll keep my thumb off of that. So anyway, I don't have any idea what I'm getting when I'm shooting, other than maybe, you know, just kind of generally. I know I'm getting cowboys and bulls and clowns, and that's really what I'm trying to get. So when I saw this out of the thousands literally that I shot, this was probably the best one of all of them that I shot that day. And the reason I like it is that you've got this cowboy in midair, and you've got the interaction of the two clowns that are facing towards the bull and the cowboy, the rider. So it brings the eye right into the center where you want the viewer to focus on this cowboy. And so the positioning of the faces of these two clowns, and the fact that other nice thing is I've got a face of the bull in the frame. And then, I mean, you can see some people in the background, like this fella back here. Although he is a black guy, I really darkened down his features, so I didn't have another face in this frame distracting the viewer from these four subjects right here. This is what I wanted the viewer to see. I didn't mind all of this up here because it's just kind of, and I did do a lot of darkening around. There's a vignette around that kind of brings the eye back away from there and back to the center. I'm going to open up some of my, I want to see what else I did here. So I don't know if can you, I should probably, hang on. Let me do something here because I'm not seeing, screw you, Sanderson. What a rude comment to say. I don't know if all the rest of you can see this, but James Sanderson's comment, not even a question, was, I think rodeo is a lot of bull. And he's pretty close. Shutter speed 2000. And so you see my layers over here. This particular layer, this is a layer I think that was designed to darken down this guy's face. I'm pretty sure of it. Or maybe there was also the sunlight that was reflecting off of these signs in the background was pretty highlighted, and so I did a lot of minimizing those issues with what I thought was distracting highlight behind these people. So those were the things I was working on. I'm trying to do some tricky stuff here so I can see your comments. Okay, now I can see the comments. I can see what I'm talking about. So those are kind of the basics. If you look down in here, you'll see that some of the tools that I use are NIK related. Will I be showing the original picture? Let me see if we can get to the original. Hang on. I mean, there's the original right there. That's the original picture, essentially. And so you can see I use curves in here to darken. If you notice this curve, I pull all of the highlights back here down. I wanted to keep all of the nice backlighting in the dust, however. So if you analyze my mask, you can see that I pull down the luminosity of the let me do something here. So that was without the mask. That's where I pulled the luminosity down. And then let me get out of here. Get back to the other product. And here are some. I use NIK a lot to do a lot of the toning. I already mentioned that one of the things I really liked about this photograph is the backlighting of the dust in here. You see the backlighting and the highlights on the animal here. You got some rim lighting on the cowboy. One of the things I did have to do, now that I'm going back over this, you'll notice that his face shows up pretty well. I actually had to I had to raise the luminosity of his face to get that expression. So one of the things I did do, I wanted to bring out just enough back here to this clown, so that you could see his features, but not make him prominently part of what the brain was going, what was going to register with the brain when you saw this image. So I liked all of this sunlight and the way that this light was rim lighting and backlighting and creating highlights. But in particular, I really liked the way that the dust was backlit. So I used Vivisa in here. Let me see how long it takes to bring Vivisa up. This may be a mistake. Let's see. I've got way too many hard drives open and running right now, so it's really slowing down. Okay, so this is Vivisa in NIK, and these little spots all over here, these are control points that are used to control the tones and the luminosity, and then it's you can control how or what affects it or what area it affects. So I used a lot of these control points to bring down the luminosity back in here and in front, and then raise the luminosity of just this cowboy. I'm going to show you, I think, if I can get to it. Okay, so the mask that's going to show up right now, see that mask? NIK allows you to create these luminance and saturation based masks, and using this mask, in this particular case, as if you watch my cursor over here, I brought the shadows up, brought a little saturation up, because by adjusting the shadows, it then wanted to have a little more saturation in the tones. So, and then all of these control points are, let me turn off, which one? This one here. So this is just a random, see how what I can do here is, with this control point, I'm controlling the luminosity in all of this area around. Each of these is a control point, and you can be very specific about where you put it, so that I'm getting to that kind of a vignette around the periphery, but also bringing up the luminance in the cowboy, so that it stands out in the final product. And so once I do Vivisa, I usually go to Color Effects Pro, and I'm going to open that up here in a second. It's going to take a little bit because, like I said, I've got looks to me like about 9 hard drives, all of them running right now. So even though this is a beast of a machine, it wants to talk to all those hard drives before it'll pull it up. So I'm pulling up this part of the Nick application, which is, if it ever gets here, here we go. Okay, so this is probably the mainstay of the Nick programming. You'll notice over here that there's a bunch of layers that allow me to use particular attributes as far as contrast and toning, and bringing an atmosphere to the image that I want to achieve. In this particular case, I've used a couple of contrast filters. There is a vignette filter on here. I use a filter that is a bleach bypass, which does really. Let me turn it off for a minute. You can see the difference. That's without the bleach bypass, and that's with the bleach bypass. Dark contrast. I use dark contrast a lot, and in this particular case, it's because there's so much of the dust that I wanted to emphasize was so highlighted that I wanted to tone it down. So this is another one I like. Midnight is a particular filter I use a lot on my stuff, and then this one here is Darken and Lighten, which allows me to put a spotlight right in the middle of this frame, so that the luminance here in the center is greater than the periphery, which it darkens down. So it creates another vignette. All right, so I'm going to check the chat room here for a second. Will you be sure? Okay, I haven't gotten any other comments. Let me get out of here and go to the next one. All right. So this is a fairly recent one. And I was with Rollins and Sanderson again. We were out at Merced Game Preserve. And it was early in the morning, about 8 some odd, and it was really foggy. I cut off the feet. Okay, so hang on a minute. They got a comment coming in here that I don't. Does it matter which order you use? Oh, does it matter which order I use the nick stuff? No. Well, yes, it does. It does matter subtly. But the nice thing about the nick programming is that you can treat it just like layers in Photoshop. And you can, as an example, you can take Color Effects Pro and move it up above Vivisa. And Vivisa is all those control points where I'm actually controlling the luminosity in various points according to the tone and the actual color values of the pixels that you set it on. That's an important point to make. In Vivisa, if I wanted to lighten up the feathers of this bird, I would put a control point on the dark pixels of those feathers. And the programming sees, okay, that's the pixel value of where the control point set. So it builds that mask based on that artificial intelligence and creates that mask out into a diminishing sphere. And I have a note here of why did I cut off the feet? John, tell me which one are you talking about, the cowboy one or this one here? Must be the cowboy one. Why is this the one where you wanted to know why I cut the feet off?
Patrick, John Crawford is muted.
Okay. So, can I respond? How do I send him? He can hear me. I guess so. John, I don't know which image you're talking about, why I cut the feet off. This one has feet in it. Here, and well, that foot is hidden, but the feet haven't been cut off in any of them. Now, if we're talking about
the birds,
those feet are in the water, John. I didn't cut them off. They're standing in water, and what I did cut off was, and I tried to keep as much as possible, is I wanted these reflections to stay in this photograph. I wanted the reflections of these birds to stay in the photograph. Obviously, these birds in front are not perfectly in focus, and although that wasn't what I tried to achieve at the time I was shooting, because remember this is very diminished light. It's a foggy morning, and so I had the aperture set as wide open as I could get it with that long lens, which was 5.6. So I didn't have a real deep focus field of focus. The birds that I wanted to be in focus are, and this photograph was very, very dark when I started. Maybe I can get to that. Let me go back to the original image. I'll open this up. So you can see I've got quite a few layers here. So Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, as you can see over here, these layers. Well, let me add something. I am a firm believer in what are they called? I use them so often I can't remember what the hell they're called. Here, let me. They're called. Damn it. Smart object. That's what they're called. I'm a firm. I can't remember the frickin' name, but I'm a firm believer in the use of smart objects, and that's what I keep opening up here. So I'm trying to get back to the original picture or the original image, and we're not there yet. I'm opening up another smart object. So this is pretty much the original image, but this is in the raw. This is in the raw editor, and you can see I've diminished the highlights quite a bit. I brought the whites way up. I got my black point and my white point in order to get it to a point where there was enough luminance in the image that I could get all of this detail in the back and get detail on the birds. But that led to dealing with a lot of noise. There was a lot of noise in this image that I had to deal with. Let me see if there's any. What lens did you use for the bird shot? It's the same lens I used for you when you were shooting the birds, the 200 to 500, open way up. That was for Jim Sanderson. The Cowboys. John Crawford said I cut off the feet in the Cowboys. I don't think I did, John. I didn't cut any of the feet off. Don't know why or what prompted that. Okay, so getting back to this image, I wanted to keep this kind of foggy, ethereal look to it. And so I use what I do use, and you'll see here, these are luminance masks. I use a lot of luminance masks. Luminosity mask is really what they're called. Luminosity mask. And so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to control, as you can see, I'm turning it on and off, and trying to bring out the shadow in the birds. But all of these layers here are luminosity masks, so that I'm bringing out the shadows that I want and knocking down the highlights that I want to keep out of the image. I really like this shadow back in here, and I wanted to keep it. So into the next smart object. Now I'm using, as you can tell, the image changed pretty dramatically because it was flat before, and then I reduced it into a smart object, and now I'm using Nick's tools to bring the toning that I want into this image. And again, the first thing I did, if you'll notice, this tool here is called Define 2. I use this to deal with a lot of noise that was up in this area in particular of this image. So Nick gives you a tool to work on the noise. I use Vivisa to, again, deal with strategically placed luminosity effect. It's trying to open here. It's going to open here in a second. But I use Vivisa to selectively manipulate the luminosity, particularly in some of the darker areas under the wings of the birds, and also conversely to knock down a lot of the highlights that were in the water, as you can follow my cursor here. And when this finally opens, we'll see some control points. I apologize about the slowness. If I'd have thought, I would have turned off all of those other hard drives so this thing would respond more quickly. But here are the control points, and I will show you the mask. That's the mask it creates on any of these. Let me get another one here. Turn that one on. So I'm creating luminance and saturation and color-based masks using these control points. This one here was to knock down the luminosity. So as I said before, I'm a consistent user of Nik software. I use color effects. John, you can hear me. Should I go into these? Are you using a specific luminosity masking program? Yes, I am. Whoever BP is, I am. And it's available through. Whoops. Hang on. Okay, it's available through Photoshop. If you go up here to Photoshop to the window menu item, and you go to this menu item here, find extensions on Exchange, it takes you to a website where there are oodles and oodles of free stuff. Some you have to pay for, some you don't. But I found and used, let me see if I can do this. I found and used, let me lower this. Okay, so I found this particular program right here. It's called Interactive Luminosity Masks. And it's really easy to use. With this image, if I want to create a luminosity mask, I tell it, okay, I want the highlight masks. And it's using artificial intelligence to go through, and now remember, this is using an already processed frame here. So everything that is in white is actually part of the mask that it's creating. I can control it and create more of a mask or less of a mask based on luminosity. So I encourage you to, I did something here. What did I do? I need to get back to wherever I was. So cold press, let me get out of here. No. Okay, so we're back to where I wanted to be. So trying to contain my comments here. Let me check to see if there's anything in the chat. All right. If you have time, could you tell us a little about what raw converter you use and what basic workflow is there before opening in Photoshop? I use the native raw editor that is in Photoshop, and or Lightroom. Sometimes I do a little bit of raw editing in Lightroom and then take it over into Photoshop. But lately what I've been doing is just simply opening up the raw file into Photoshop as a smart object. And then I open up the raw editor there and do my raw editing. Then what I will do is I will take it into Photoshop proper, and usually start out with any luminosity masks that I'm dealing with, any cloning that I want to do, all of the kind of nuts and bolts of getting the basic image straightened out so that it's where I want before I go in and do the artistic shit. So the raw editor that I use is the one that's in Photoshop. I own Photo Lab. I own that one and have played around in it, but I'm just like every other creature on the planet. The learning curve, I'm so far ahead in the learning curve on the Photoshop stuff that that's what I continue to use. I hope I answered the question on the luminosity masking. It's in, you can find it in, where'd it go? I had it in here. I did something with it in that last excursion into it. But you can find it in Photoshop. You go to find extensions on Exchange, and again, you go in here and you find what you need. If you, as an individual, want me to help you through that process on the phone or something, I'd be happy to do that with you. Anyhow, I use Nick to get this image to where I wanted it artistically, and that was kind of, it's actually a color image. When you first look at it, you're inclined to think maybe it's monochrome, but it's not. It's actually a color image, and I intentionally left it kind of this dreamy Chinese silk screen kind of effect. Did I know where I was going when I started? No, not really, but I started playing around and moving this image using some of the tools that I've talked about. I knew that I wanted to keep it kind of that foggy look, and but it did necessitate me bringing the luminance up overall so that the individual birds and the plant life in the background, and in particular, what I found very attractive to me anyway, was I loved all of these shadows back here. You see these shadows of the trees? So I really wanted to keep those from an artistic standpoint. All right, let me see if there's another comment over here. Thanks for the explanation, Bonnie Paulson. All right, Bonnie. Okay, so any other questions on this particular image? Let me see if I can get out of here. That's the cowboy. All right, so this is an image that I took in Ireland in 2018, and I had to do quite a bit of work on this one. And the reason that I liked it when I was at this place, a friend of mine introduced me to this location. This is in a tourist area. Glendalough is the name of it's a monastic site, but there's about 11 different individual churches or medieval church ruins in that complex, and this is one of the lesser known sites. And what attracted me right away is all the texture in this image. This is what drew me to this scene in the first place. All of the texture in this wall. Why is that doing that? I don't want it to do that. All of the texture in this wall, the texture in all of this vegetation, the texture and color of the ferns. This wall back here is kind of a continuation of all of this texture. And then all of the leaves and the grass and the texture in the stone. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I keep putting my thumb on my Wacom tablet. So I was absolutely drawn to this. Let me get back to the original image, however, because I had to do a hell of a lot of goddamn work on this. Go back another smart object. Go back another smart object. Okay, so this is the original image. It really isn't. I didn't get all the way back. Somehow or another, there must be another smart object in here. So let me just describe it. I had to use Photoshop's perspective control filter. You can go up here. Actually, you can do it. Maybe I was in the right place. Okay, I was in the right place. I used the perspective control application to this. When I took this image, I was at an angle to this high cross. That's what those things are called. I was at an angle to it, and I didn't like it. It made this high cross look disproportionate to the rest of the scene. So what I had to do is I had to go in and use the perspective control tools in Photoshop to get it to face properly the viewer. For some reason, I can't get back to, and the reason is this: a lot of times I will start an image and do a lot of basic work like getting things turned face properly, and then make a copy of that and work on that copy. So this is probably what has happened here. Let me see if there's any comments. Hang on. It's cranking up, trying to get me back to a. Okay, so. All right, so. Okay, so no additional questions. I'm going to close this. Close this. These are all iterations of the image itself. I'm going to go back because this smart object here is where I use Nick over here, as you can see in the layers. So I did my work in Nick here. There was a rock that was in here I cloned out. But suffice it to say that here it is right here. If I do this, see that rock? I didn't like that rock right on the edge of the frame. And it got that way because I had to crop it. Once I used the perspective control tool that rock was where it was supposed to be, right there. But when I got done with perspective control, it's over on the edge. I didn't like it, so I moved it back to where I wanted it. Let me get out of here. Get back to... All right, so this is basically where this is basically the finished product. There's one other thing I want to point out is I do a lot of printing of these things, and I always go in and adjust the luminance. You can see it just slightly adjusted there, depending on whatever I'm printing it on. As an example, if you do a Control Y, you see that change? That's the soft proof feature of Photoshop that tells you what your print is going to look like if you're printing it on this particular kind of paper, cold press natural. And so I'll turn that on and then go in and adjust contrast and luminance so that it's going to print right, and it actually prints better than it looks here. So that would be the printed version of it. But on all of these images, if I'm going to print it, I do a print adjustment right here. So I don't know how important that is, but there it is for free. And this is a group. I just put all these layers into a group. I don't normally sharpen at all until I'm ready to print. And that's why the sharpener tool, which is a Nick product, again, that's why I used it here. Okay, I don't have any other questions. So I'm going to assume everybody is bored to death with this image. I'm going to move to the next one. So we did Wood Lake. We did Reefert Church. We're going to do this one. Now, this is actually something I did fairly recently. Jim Sanderson and I took a trip over to Eureka Dunes earlier this year. And one afternoon, this was probably at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I noticed the moon was out, and the Ansel Adams in me came out, and so I knew that I was going to turn all of these into a black, or I knew I was going to turn this into a black and white. Let's go. I'm going to try to get back to the original shot. Okay, so that's kind of sort of the original shot with a filter on there. I used a filter. I'm not sure why that sky is so blue, but it's something that I did in this smart object. Yeah, so what I did in here is I brought my whites up. I'm sure that's what I did. I brought my whites way up because I wanted to make sure that these clouds that were these wisp of a cloud were in here, and I wanted to make sure that that moon was in the final image prominently. So let me get back to so I did all of that. I always process the image as a color image first. So I use down here, you'll notice I use Color Effects Pro first. Let me see if I can turn that off real quickly and see. I'll show you what it looks like. It'll take a moment again because it's talking to about 9 different hard drives over there. Come on, sweetheart. It's grinding. It's grinding. All right, so we're going to take a look at the color version here. Those little dots up here, those are where I went in and took care of sensor spots and whatnot. It's going to take forever here. Hang on. Maybe it does take 30 minutes per image, John. Okay, so this is kind of where I got it to as a color image. What I'm trying to do here is I want this side of the dunes right in here and right in here. They were a little hot. They weren't really overexposed. They weren't off the edge of the histogram, but they were just too hot for me. I wanted to tone them down. And I did that in here. But then, so this is what it looked like as a color image. Let me turn that off because that's confusing. Okay, so this is what it looked like as a color image. Remembering that the sky is blue as it is because I brought the whites up so high in the raw editor. So then I took it into Nik software, their black and white or their monochrome, which is called Silver Effects Pro. Right down here is the name, and it's going to take me. It's going to take me into the monochrome module, so that I can turn this color image into a monochrome. Eventually, when I get into this, when I got into it, and it'll get there shortly, when I finally got into it, I did an Ansel Adams thing. I used a red filter so that the sky would be black. And then I can see I did some luminance stuff here. Okay, so I brought the luminance down with some curves. And that pretty much, oh, I know, the most important part about this is composition. The reason I like this image so damn much is I love the texture and the ripples of the sand. And I worked hard with luminosity masks to bring out the distinction of these ripples. In other words, I used luminosity masks to bring up the highlight part of the ripple and tone down the shadow part of the ripples so that they stand out here. And all of this texture and these patterns in the dune itself, I used luminosity masks and contrast to really bring those out. And I did the same thing so that these clouds, as wispy as they were, would come through and be prominent in the sky. Part of that was the result of using a blue filter in Nik's monochrome. Now, this was judged, and some of you probably saw the judging, and the judge felt that this moon shouldn't have been equidistant or should not have been right over the peak of this dune. Candidly, I composed it in the camera knowing full well I wanted this moon directly over this peak, assuming that the rule of leading lines was going to be more important than putting it off center so that you get a little tension in the image. I wanted to use these leading lines that are in this dune to take your eye right up to this moon. And so that's why it's positioned where it is. It was an artistic decision I made. And at the time that I was processing, and actually at the time, and I have others where that moon is one side or the other of that peak, but they don't look as good as this one with that moon dead center over the top of that peak. So Sam Shaw is a great photographer, but I disagree with his opinion that the moon would have looked better one side or the other, even slightly. There is a rule we are all aware of that sometimes you make the image better by creating a little tension and moving this off center. But again, I wanted all of these leading lines that are in this image to bring you right up here to this moon. All right, I think you're probably all bored to death with that one. That's the final version of it right there. I don't see any other questions in the chat room, so I'm going to go to this one. And this is an old one. This one was shot in Ireland in 2015. But let me tell you why I shot this and the way I shot it. This is Carriga Howley or Grace O'Malley's. There's a great story. It's not a myth or a legend. There was a female pirate in the Middle Ages by the name of Gracie O'Malley, and she had a pirate fleet that operated on the west coast of Ireland and just raised hell with the Brits and their commercial vesseling, if that's a word. And this was her stronghold. And so naturally, based just on the story itself, I had to get there and shoot this. But here's why I shot this. First of all, the sky was terrible. This is a sky that I borrowed from another place in Ireland and dropped it in behind here. But this is an HDR rendered image. When I shot this, I shot 9 different frames, each of them one f-stop apart from overexposed to underexposed. I wanted to get all of this color and all of this tone that was in this little stream that's leading into this inlet, this fjord almost. And I wanted to have all of this visually lead the viewer right up to this castle. So I shot it from way back, really low. I was damn near in the water of this stream. Like I said, I shot it in HDR so that I could get all of the toning that I want, so that the shadows weren't blocked up. And offset it. This obviously the castle is not dead center. This is a time. And normally, going back to that previous image where the moon is dead center, normally my subject is never in the center of a frame unless there's a reason to have it be there. If there's a reason for it to be there, if I'm trying to lead the viewer or cause some effect by the placement of the subject matter that I'm shooting, most of my images, you'll notice, use the rule of thirds. I believe in it. I think it has the best effect. This castle is set off and is in the upper right quadrant, third. It's not a quadrant, it's a third. But what I was trying to achieve is getting all of this vibrant color in the grasses and in the hills in the back, and then get a nice sky for it to play against. What else? One of the other things that I do, and this is probably very common to most of you, but when I shoot a building, I very rarely shoot it straight on to one elevation. I always shoot into a corner of two elevations. This elevation and this elevation. I've always got a corner in my shots, normally, unless there's a reason that I either couldn't achieve that or I wanted to achieve something else. But when I'm shooting a building, I never shoot it straight on. It just loses three-dimensionality when you do that. So my preference and my technique is to get a corner and preferably make sure that there's a difference in tone between one elevation and the other elevation. I brought the shadows up in this elevation. You can see the detail, but only because I brought the shadows up. All right, there's a question over here. Hang on. Try double-clicking in the hand icon to enlarge image on the screen. Okay, I'll do that, but then I can't see your questions. Wait a minute. Maybe I can pull that. Hang on. Maybe I can pull this screen over to my, yeah, there we go. I put you on the other monitor. Okay, now I can see your questions. All right, so here we go. So who sent me that? John Rollins. Is this large enough, John? I can see you shake your head yes or no. All right, so anyhow, the original sky had some problems. It was not as good as this sky, and that's the thing about HDR. If you don't use HDR and you want to try it, it's a great technique, but if those clouds are moving, and they usually are, it can cause a lot of artifacts that don't look good in the sky. So typically what I will do, I didn't do it in this case because I didn't have as robust a sky as the one I wound up dropping into it. But normally I will select one frame of the 9 that I took and drop that sky into the rendering that I created using the HDR technique. So that's what happened here. Okay. Glendalough. Okay, so that's 4 of them, isn't it? Here's one that you've all seen before, but it's worth talking about. This was actually, as you can see in the title, this was rendered using HDR techniques, and this is in that same place as that high cross that we talked about earlier. There's an image missing. Huh. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the thing that drew me to this site and this scene, this view, if you will, is all of the texture and the color. And that we have this beautiful leading, it's almost a glowing leading line that takes you back here to this mysterious place where my mind was, God, I wonder what's back there. And that's really what I was trying to achieve as the hook in this particular image. But the main reason that I shot it is all of this luscious texture and all of this luscious color. And I took 9 different shots, each of them a stop apart from underexposed to overexposed, and worked very hard using, I got my thumb on my, God damn it, I keep putting my thumb on my my Wacom tablet gizmo that makes it scroll. But I wanted to keep all of this luscious color. Now, the question you should be asking is, did you do anything to enhance that color? Yeah, I did. I brought the vibrance up significantly. I also used luminosity mask to control particularly these stones in here, they were a little bit too hot for me. They were a little too bright, so I brought the luminosity down. There were some white stones. If you notice, there's white here and some white lichen in here, and I brought the luminosity down on some of these areas. But I think the biggest processing I did to get it to where it looked like what I remembered it as when I was there was I really cranked up the vibrance in this particular image. Gosh, I don't know what else to tell you. John, do you have any suggestions? I've got more.
Well, we've done our minimum hour. If the group would like you to show a couple more images, give us a sign. Say yes, or wave in the window or whatever. So we've got several dark screens, so I don't know what to think.
They got tired of me droning on. That's what it was. Let me bring this one up. Anyway, just assuming that this is good enough for shits and giggles. Okay. Bring this one up. Because this is kind of an interesting one from the standpoint of technique. This is another HDR shot. In other words, 9 different frames, one-stop differentiation in exposure. And I had to do that because this sky was very bright and everything below the horizon was very dark. And so I had to go to HDR to get enough exposure for these dark areas down here and control the sky. Now, the sky is saturated more than what it really was, but this is what it looked like to me. In other words, and Jim Sanderson was standing next to me, and I think he'll attest to the fact that the sky was pretty colorful, but the process of rendering it with HDR actually brought the luminance down, and consequently, the saturation goes up, as you know. So the sky has benefited from being having its luminosity reduced, and it is more saturated. But the sky actually, and there was a version. I got so carried away with this image that I went as far as to put some more color into the sky, but it didn't look right, so I got rid of it. This one does not have any hue or any changes made by virtue. In other words, I didn't use selective color. And I didn't use originally I did use a solid color layer at a very low opacity, but it just was not believable. So I got rid of it. And this is actually the product of what was there at the time. There's a couple of problems with this particular image, but I've made excuses that sound like, well, it's more artistic if there is a certain amount of movement blur in this bush right here. And there is. If you go in real close, you'll see that there's blur. That's movement blur. The wind was blowing at the time. But my response to the otherwise correct technical comment is, yeah, but it looks more artsy this way. So I left it that. It's kind of blurry, but everything behind it is sharp enough. When you use HDR, okay, the question here from John Rollins, software used to process the HDR, is again, this is the Nick Suite palette. And so I use HDR Effects Pro 2. And this one here, you can merge those 9 images that I took. I grab those. I open up this application, this module, and go in and grab the 9 images and then tell it, okay, create me an HDR image. And it has artificial intelligence, merges the 9 layers, the 9 images, corrects for too much shadow and too much highlights, and then spits out a single image that I then take into Photoshop and do the major work on. So that's what I use for the HDR rendering. One of the things that I always have to do when you use HDR, because you're changing the pixels and the tonality of everything above the horizon, normally this is where you're going to see it. You'll always see a halo along the entire horizon line. So you have to go in and mask it out and clone in that halo so that you don't have that halo showing up. And that's, I had to do it in this case. But I can't think of anything else intelligent to tell you about this image other than, yes, I know it's a little blurry, but that's my artistic taste. That's why I did that. It just looks more artsy.
You also got a 10 from the judge.
Yeah, it works. It works. I mean, Jim Sanderson was standing right next to me when I was shooting this thing, and I think he will attest to the fact that this sky was every bit full of this much color. Now, the luminosity was a lot greater, so it wasn't as saturated, but this sky is pretty natural.
It was a beautiful sky. I was not close to you, but I was nearby. Patrick, I want to thank you for the effort that you put in for our presentation tonight. You've been a great first start for our feature artist, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm looking forward to hearing from other featured artists in our club. It
was my pleasure, John.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat.
Oh, my pleasure. Trust me. Oh, Bonnie Paulson says she likes the artistic shit. I do too. Thanks, Bonnie. All right, so I guess I'm going to sign off unless you got some more for me here.
Well, thanks,
Thanks,
Pat.
Pat.
That was very good. Very
Very
interesting.
good, Patrick. Look
Thank
on.
you very much. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks,
All right.
Pat.
I'm signing off.
All right.
Bye now.
I will too.
Mhm.